There's a person, a third brother here with Solomon and Elimelech. And this is the one who gets first opportunity, right? A first refusal to marry Ruth. And he turns it down. And it seems that God, well, the author actually of the Book of Ruth is the prophet Samuel Shmuel. And Shmuel decided sort of to spare the guy eternal embarrassment when the guy turned down the opportunity to marry Ruth, because he did not do anything wrong. So Shmuel, in writing the Book of Ruth, did not want it to be like in all of history, this guy is going to become almost a meme, an expression that everyone will talk about. Man, lost opportunities. Think of, I don't know, Jake Goldstein, whatever his name would have been. What happened was, as we know, he's going to turn down the chance to marry Ruth because he's already married. And it's going to create more complication within his marriage and household to bring an additional wife. In those days, of course, it was permitted to marry more than one wife at a time. And this would have been a sort of yavama, a case of person who left behind, where a brother dies, leaves behind a wife. So Elimelech did not leave behind a wife, but he left behind like a daughter-in-law. And so what you end up with is the following. You end up with, we don't know his name, anonymous, 3 brothers. Elimelech dies. And in dying, he left behind 2 sons, Machlon and Kilion. Solomon had a son, Boaz. Ploni Almoni had no son. So this would be a little bit better. Well, Ploni Almoni apparently had a daughter in Naomi. That's what it seems. We're going to see the text to go into it deeper. All right. How could he have married, if he's the father of Naomi, how could he have married Ruth? Because Ruth was a non-Jew at the time she married Machlon and Kilion. So that's why I made a chart, because it's potentially a little bit confusing. 3 brothers, 1 is dead. Elimelech left behind 2 sons, Machlon and Kilion. Now they're dead. And they have left behind 2 wives, and those 2 wives are Orpah and Ruth. Now, Orpah has gone back to Moab, so she's out of the picture now. We're gonna just take her out. We learned all about her last week. But Ruth, the daughter of King Eglon the Moabite, Ruth is the non-Jewish wife of one of these 2. And she's in the picture. All right. Solomon has a son named Boaz. So far, he's not in the story. We don't know who he is. We haven't heard of him yet. He's coming up in a moment. Ploni Almoni, Naomi. So Naomi was married to her uncle. If Elimelech was the brother of her father, she is his niece. You're allowed to get married in the Bible, in the Tanakh. That's the one close relationship that is not forbidden. An uncle with a niece. Let's take a look at that one a moment, a bit closer. Let's get to that piece of it. Okay, not that piece. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. I'll take off the share, and okay, that's how we do it. Let me just show you how the forbidden marriages work there. So in Vayikra Yudchet, in chapter 18 of the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, Parshat, okay, there we go. Achremot, right before Kedoshim. So there are forbidden relationships. You shall not copy the practices of the Egyptians. That's where you were living. You've been exposed to Egyptian immorality, and you're about to be exposed to Canaanite immorality, the land where you're moving. That's God talking to the Jews in the desert. My rules alone shall you observe, Mishpatai Tasu. Okay. And it lists all the forbidden relationships. And we don't normally pay that much careful attention because the general thought that you come out of from chapter 18 is that it's all forbidden, all of these. But if you look carefully, they do not, the Torah does not prohibit an uncle with a niece. You're not allowed to marry Ervat Avicha V'Ervat. A woman is not allowed to marry her father, and the man is not allowed to marry his mother. Okay, we know that. Furthermore, not allowed to be with your father's wife. So though it's not your birth mother, but if the father is widowed or divorced to marry someone else, the son is not allowed to be with that woman either. The father's wife, even if it's not the mother. And achotcha bati vicha o bati mecha, you're not allowed to be with the girl. A man is not allowed to be with a girl who is the daughter of the father or mother, whether it's a moledet bayit, whether it's literally your literal parent's daughter, or it's like a sister-in-law, a stepsister. And then you're not allowed to be with bat bincha, with the daughter of your son or the daughter of your daughter. So you're not allowed to be with them either. Okay. The daughter of your daughter. But it doesn't say the daughter of your brother. Next, not allowed to be with a wife of your father, we said already, and she's Eshet Avicha Moledet Avicha, someone who came out of your father's household. Achot Avicha, your father's sister, which is your aunt or aunt. Aha. So you're not allowed to marry your aunt or aunt, but you are allowed to marry your uncle. And the aunt or aunt is not allowed to marry her nephew, but the uncle is allowed to marry the niece. Are we leaving anything out? No, because next is achot imcha, the sister of your mother. So the sister of your father, that's one kind of aunt, and that's the sister of your mother, the other kind. And then there's the brother of your father. You're not allowed, so are you allowed to be with your uncle? Are you a woman allowed to be the daughter of your father to be with your uncle after all? That's not what's forbidden. El ish tolo tikrav. You're not allowed to be, the male is not allowed to be intimate with the wife of the uncle, but dodat chahi, but the girl is allowed to be with the sister of the uncle. So this is something we may not all have realized, but it is the one exceptionally close relationship that the Torah does not forbid, an uncle with a niece. So Naomi was Elimelech's niece. They did nothing wrong in that regard. The wrong was leaving Eretz Israel, but there was nothing wrong otherwise. Okay. And what we're going to find is that now Naomi, so she's there with Ruth, her daughter-in-law, encountering Boaz, Naomi's cousin. So there's a very close relationship. They're not just distant relatives. And that's going to play out in lots of different ways in this story. It also means that in chapter 4, when the question becomes who might marry Ruth, since she's now being put on the market, so to speak, first shot is Ploni Almoni. He's given the first right of refusal, and now we see the chart, and we see why. Because Ruth's technically relationships are through her father-in-law Elimelech and husband. And so Ploni Almoni is her kind of uncle, not by blood, She married into the family, but Ploni Almoni has priority, seniority as that generation of brothers over the next generation, their children, of which Boaz is the only one on the chart. Ruth is obviously not going to marry Naomi. So the very next on that chart would be Boaz. Therefore, so we now have a much, much clearer picture of who everybody is. 3 brothers. She's going to have the first crack. He's going to have the first crack at marrying her. He's going to turn it down. Boaz gets the next right of refusal. He accepts it. Naomi and Boaz are cousins. Finally, the Gemara tells us that Boaz is also known as Iftzan. And Iftzan was a judge, a shofet, in Israel during the era of the Shoftim. There were the judges, the Book of Judges. Shmuel Hanavi, the prophet Samuel, wrote the Book of Judges, and he wrote the Book of Ruth. It was all during the same period. And during his lifetime, the judges were before the prophets. And it devolved on him, Shmuel, Samuel, as the first and greatest of prophets, to write the history, the narrative of the era of the judges, the Book of Shoftim. And because it was written by a religious, spiritual leader and not by an historian, Shmuel wrote the Book of Judges not merely as a history, but as a spiritual guide. And we learn about people who did righteous and who did evil. And so as it's telling us, for example, that Elimelech moved from Israel to Moab during the time of the famine, it also conveys that he did the wrong thing. And it gets into right and wrong because it was written by a shofet. It's like if a rabbi were writing the history, you'll get a different history from the history you would get if a secular historian wrote it. Now, we've covered everybody here. And let's take out another moment while we're doing this to get a better sense as well of the conversion. The conversion is a very important part of the entire thing. Let me get that off again. I did that before and I did it wrong then too. Let's take this off the screen and then put this back on the screen. We're doing fine now. The text, okay, great. So what we've got, just going back to where we left off a moment ago. Okay, great. And let me look at you while I'm saying this. Conversion. Conversion requires accepting, according to the Shulchan Aruch, as it's done now, there's actually a formal procedure in the Shulchan Aruch. It does not designate in the Shulchan Aruch how long the learning must go. Theoretically, it could just be a day. It could be that if you know everything, there's not a formal exam. There's not a standard exam per se. A person must basically be able to understand and learn certain basics. God created the world. God gave us the Torah. The Torah was given at Mount Sinai. We just did this on Shavuot. There's an oral Torah that the overwhelming majority, 99% of the Torah, is not written in the Chumash, but was conveyed orally by God to Moshe at Mount Sinai. The prospective convert is taught that, and is then taught some mitzvot. You don't need, technically, according to the Shulchan Aruch, the convert does not need to learn every one of the mitzvot. We do our best to teach every one of the mitzvot, but it's not a sine qua non. It's not like if they don't learn all the mitzvot, they can't convert. It's not like there's a test for which they need to answer each and every of the mitzvot, or they need to be asked all the mitzvot and they need to get a 98 on the test. It's rather they need to be taught some major mitzvot and a few minor mitzvot, get a flavor of what they're getting into, particularly Shabbat. You can imagine Shabbat, Kashrut, and Taharat HaMishpacha, going to mikvah, and some basics. But it doesn't necessarily, in the technicality, have to be every single mitzvah. And there's all kinds of important implications that we'll come to in a moment. So a convert doesn't have to learn everything. But the Shulchan Aruch says you have to teach them. And then when they're ready, for a male, there's a circumcision. Obviously not for female. We don't have, God forbid, that Arab Muslim female genital circumcision. It's so horrible. If the man already was circumcised, let's say as a non-Jew, the parents had him circumcised. They do that in the United States a lot, less so in Europe and in other countries. In the United States, it's much, much more frequent among non-Jews to be circumcised medically at a hospital. Now the person's ready to be circumcised, and you cannot circumcise him because he's got no foreskin. It's been taken off. So you do a hatafat dam brit milah. You do with like a pin. You get a mohel who does a pin pricking of the male organ and draws a little bit of blood. He just takes a handkerchief or whatever, and after sticking in the needle or whatever, they make sure some blood came out. And that's done in lieu of the brit, in lieu of the milah, in lieu of the full circumcision. And that's step one of the two. It is supposed to be done l'shem brit milah. It's very important. People don't understand this. Let me give an example before I'm specific. I'm walking to shul on Rosh Hashanah, and as I'm walking to shul on Rosh Hashanah, I happen to pass another shul. Baruch Hashem, I live in a neighborhood with a lot of shuls. Let's say Irvine, not so many, but we have 3 in Irvine. But let's say I'm passing by a shul, and their window is open, and their minyan started earlier than the shul I'm going to. As I'm walking by, I hear the shofar being blown. Do I fulfill the mitzvah for Rosh Hashanah hearing shofar by having, by happenstance, heard the shofar going through the window of that other shul whose window was open? The answer is no. I did not fulfill the mitzvah. Number one, the person blowing the shofar, the Baal Tekiah, did not have in mind people outside the shul, the sanctuary. Look, if there's 200 people in shul, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, they get a big turnout. So maybe the Baal Tekiah, you would not say, had every one of the 300 people and women, every one of the 600 people in mind. But he had in mind with the bracha and his shofar blowing that he's doing it to everybody in the room. But he doesn't have in mind to be motzi, to help other people who happen to be walking by. He doesn't have them in mind with his bracha. So his bracha is not for me walking by the shul, and I did not answer amen to a bracha with the intention of being yotzei, of fulfilling my mitzvah, to hear it through the window anyway. Now, if I had told the Baal Tekiah, the shofar blower, look, I'm going to be standing outside. I'm immunosuppressed, and I can't be indoors with so many people because I have to have, so I'm going to stand right outside the window, and please have me in mind when you say the bracha. So, and then I answer amen when I hear his bracha. Well, then, hearing his bracha on the other side of the window, I fulfill the mitzvah. But if I just so happen to pass by, I don't fulfill the mitzvah. I have to catch the shofar in my shoe. Same thing with a bris. The fact that a baby is born and gets circumcised in a hospital by a Jewish doctor does not mean the child had a bris. If the doctor circumcised the child in the American way, that it's the same. In terms of the procedure, maybe it's pretty much the same. There are little bits of differences. I don't want to get into that with the clamps and the other things. I don't want to get into all those details. But let's say a Jewish, not only a non-Jewish, a Jewish doctor, a urologist, circumcised a baby in the hospital. The parents are not religious. They weren't doing it for religion, but they were doing it like their next door non-Jewish neighbors having their son circumcised because they believe it's healthy. There are some theories that it could play a role in reducing the chances of certain kinds of cancer, let's say. Whatever. Not getting into that. Now, the child grows up and finds out from his parents that when he was a little boy, he was circumcised by Dr. Goldstein in Mount Sinai Hospital. Can't get closer to God than Mount Sinai. And, but it wasn't the mohel, and there was no bracha. It was not l'shem gerus. It was not l'shem gerut. It was not for the purpose of circumcision, though it was in actual terms identical. That fellow has never been circumcised for Jewish purposes. He's got to get himself a mohel. Let's say he's 45 years old. Just found out at 45. Thank God you found out while you're alive. Get a mohel. And the mohel will do a pinprick because the other, it can't be done anymore. Now, let's do another one. What if it's a Reform couple or Reform parents, and they had a Jewish doctor in the hospital do it because they were thinking, we want it to be, he's Jewish, our son is Jewish. We're not doing it for health reasons. We're not doing it because the next door neighbor did it. They're non-Jewish. We're Jewish. Jewish boys get circumcised. So they offered Dr. McGillicuddy, and we asked for a Jewish urologist so he could be circumcised by a Jewish urologist. In comes the Jewish urologist. I'm absolutely Jewish. Don't worry about it. My mother's Jewish. It's not a kosher circumcision for bris. If the doctor did not have in mind, did not say recite a bracha, l'shem shamayim, or if he's just mumbling words and he's not doing it as a mitzvah, it's not but I was circumcised. There's a foreskin that's missing. It's not a kosher bris, and you have to get another one. What if it's a mohel? There's reform mohels. I know a conservative mohel. He doesn't believe in God. He doesn't. He's ethnically proud. I'm a proud ethnic Jew. Part of being an ethnic Jew is you have a bris. I'm trained. I happen to be a urologist. I also know how to be a mohel. And I go around when people at this conservative temple have boys, the rabbi always refers me. There's a real problem with that. Almost surely, under Halakhah, his brises are not kosher. And there has to be a pinprick. This is as a rabbi of 40 plus years, and people come to me, often they come to me for a referral. Just had a boy, Mazel Tov, can you refer us to a mohel? In Los Angeles, there's always been this one mohel who does like 98% of all the brises. And everybody, he did my son, he's been doing brises forever and ever. Had I been born in Los Angeles, probably would have done me. I was born in Brooklyn, but he's been doing brises. But then there are other mohalim, and they also do. But a rabbi will only refer to a proper mohel. What's a proper mohel? Not someone necessarily who only has passed the test and knows how to do a medical proper circumcision, but has to be Yireh Shamayim, somebody who fears God, who believes in God, who says a bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech, blessed are you, God, our King of the universe, and really believes up there's a King of the universe listening right now. Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, and he commanded us. This is the God who commanded us in the Torah. Not a mohel who doesn't, but you don't take the Torah literally. It didn't really happen. There weren't any Jews at Mount Sinai, but it's our way. That's not a kosher bris, even though it looks kosher. Just as hearing a shofar blown on Rosh Hashanah by a truly kosher baltakiya still is not a mitzvah if it's not done with a kavanah, with intention to fulfill the mitzvah. And this, by the way, I'm not going to go and give you 100 examples, but this is mitzvah after mitzvah after mitzvah after mitzvah. Friday night at the Shabbos table, you're all gathered, 10 people, having a beautiful group Shabbos meal, and the person at the head of the table recites the Hamotzi, and everybody listens, or Hamotzi, Lechem, Norza, Amen. If you did not answer Amen, you're not supposed to eat the bread. You have to be Yotze. You have to fulfill the mitzvah, either by reciting your own bracha, or this is something where you can fulfill the mitzvah by answering someone else's bracha, assuming the one reciting the bracha has you in mind, and you have in mind with your Amen to fulfill the mitzvah. But if you did not answer Amen, no dice. You did not fulfill it. There are certain mitzvahs for which you cannot do it that way. You have to say your own bracha. Come out of the restroom. You don't go out of the restroom and then have somebody else half joking say the Asher Yotzar bracha, and then you answer Amen. That's your bracha. You're the one who recites that bracha. So in many cases, many foods, for example, eating foods, a lot of brachas. Putting on tefillin and talis, a lot of brachas. The ladies lighting Shabbos candles. You don't have someone else, she doesn't know how to say the bracha. So you have somebody else with her and says, not that she says Amen and lights the candles. Rather, the one who's standing next to her and knows the bracha says, repeat after me, Baruch, Baruch, Lahadlik, Lahadlik, Ner, Shal, Shabbat. Okay, go ahead and light the candles. Okay, go ahead and light the candles. So these are very important. This is part of converting. Ruth is the classic model, the template for conversion to Judaism. I'm not just saying that like descriptively. Literally, that's the model of conversion to this day. It's built off the conversion of Ruth. Now, in those days, they did not have a Beis Din per se, where it happened the way it happens now. What happened there is she was Makabel Ol Malchut Shemayim. She took upon herself the yoke, Y-O-K-E, of heaven. She knew a lot of the mitzvahs. She already learned. She'd been married to she'd been living in a Jewish household. She'd been following the Jewish God, perhaps side by side with the Moabite God. Perhaps she had rejected the Moabite God. Many say that there simply was no worship of the Moabite God while they were living with Machlon and Kilion, that Orpah did not give up her beliefs, but she did not practice those beliefs out of courtesy, and maybe they did both. We've seen that in different ways, even nowadays, unfortunately, people who do this and that. And so it's certainly believable that she already would have known Shabbos, she would have known kashrut, she would have known about mikvah. They would not have had a mikvah in Moab. It's the only family in all of Moab, but they could have gone to the Jordan River, a natural body of water. If they were doing that, or what they were doing, how they were living, we don't know all those details. But she learned. So we learned last class that Naomi went through a litany. Look, I have to tell you, if you're going to marry me, if you're going to be following me to Eretz Yisrael, you have to know we don't walk more than 2,000 mil on Shabbat. Where you go, I will go. And there's certain cemeteries for people that are executed with stoning, and there's certain cemetery. Well, where you're buried, I'll be buried. And a woman cannot be in the same room as a man. Well, where you sleep, I'll sleep, and all of that. So we learned from there that you're supposed to teach the non-Jew, supposed to formally, on the day of conversion, explicitly go through a few of the mitzvot one last time. Just a reminder, we know you've studied it, and you're supposed to ask and elicit from them a few responses. Yes, I believe in the one God. I believe that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, the oral law. I believe in the oral law. If she says, or he, but we're talking about Ruth, if she says in the mikveh, as she's converting, yes, and also in terms of how this is done, in terms of modesty, the woman's in the mikveh, she's not wearing anything. The woman goes in the mikveh under the supervision of the mikveh lady. There's a woman who works at the mikveh, supervises that, just as she does with wives who go in monthly, supervises the female convert, go into the mikveh, they immerse, make sure all their hair goes under the water, all of that. 3 rabbis, the Bet Din, stand outside the mikveh with their backs toward the mikveh. They don't see anything going on there. And they hear the splash of water. You don't have to dive into the pool, so to speak, to create a splash. If a lady is in the mikveh and she dunks her head into the water and pulls it out 3 times, or even if it would be 1 time, you hear a little bit of a displacement of water. I'm using the word splash. So the rabbis hear it. They trust the mikveh lady. Her testimony is sufficient. The rabbis, with their backs towards the mikveh, so they don't see anything. In terms of modesty, they ask some basic questions. Do you believe that there is only one God? Do you believe that God gave the oral law, taught the oral law to Moses at Mount Sinai? Do you accept upon yourself every single oral law that was taught at Mount Sinai? Of course, there are certain laws don't apply to her because she's a woman. So, bris. So it's not like she accepts upon herself bris, though she will for her son if she has a son. And you don't have Beit HaMikdash, there's no korbanot, there's no sacrifices. But in terms of the mitzvot that are available, do you accept upon yourself every single one? Let's say the woman says the following: Rabbis, I believe God in one God. I believe he spent 40 days with Moses on Mount Sinai, taught him all of the oral law. I believe in everything in the oral law except for one. I just can't buy into that thing that LGBTQIA plus is not okay. I just can't buy into everything else. But I have nothing. I don't see anything wrong with homosexuality and lesbianism and gay marriage. And transgender, gender affirming care, gender affirming surgery. But other than that, 99.99%, only 1 out of 613 or 2 out of 613, it's still over 99%. That's not a kosher conversion. There's no conversion. There are, in the so-called open Orthodox universe, those who will accept them. That's why we refer to the so-called open Orthodox as non-Orthodox. They're phony. They're complete frauds. Open Orthodoxy is not orthodoxy. If you don't know what open Orthodoxy is, I'm certainly not going to devote. I don't want to be the one you remember as the one who even explained what it is. But it's a left-wing pseudo-orthodoxy that is off the it's off the rails. And they are the ones who recognize woman rabbis, and they are the one because the Methodists decided to do it and the Episcopalians decided to do it, so they do it. And then number 2, they're the ones who accept all the LGBTQ. The Chovevei Torah, YCT, ordains homosexuals. The so-called Yeshiva Maharat, it's no yeshiva, they ordain woman rabbis who are overtly lesbians on their website. They have little bios, little paragraph or 3-paragraph long biographies of each of their rabbinical students to be a Maharat. 2 of them are overtly, outright, out of the closet lesbians on the Yeshiva Maharat page. So that's not Orthodox Judaism. It's not politics. It's not Orthodox Judaism. But they keep Shabbos. I don't know what they keep. I don't care what they keep. That's not Judaism. It's very close to Judaism. It's just like Jews for Jesus, except for one thing. It's almost the same. Just one thing. So same thing with them. So what happens with Ruth is she accepts everything, and she becomes the template. And in studying the Book of Ruth, even if it meant taking out a real chunk of time on this, it is central because as a practicing rabbi for 40 years, I hear it constantly. And perhaps you, as a non-rabbi, just talking with some of your non-Orthodox friends, perhaps have been confronted or challenged at some point in your lives. Why do you have to go to so much trouble to convert, for God's sake? Ruth didn't have to do that. Ruth converted. She did it in 3 verses. In 2 verses, didn't even need a chapter. Why are you putting me through all this? Why don't you accept this? After all, the rabbi gave Marilyn Monroe a beautiful certificate. You can find it online. She's Jewish. She was converted by the Reform rabbi at the Wilshire Boulevard Temple, biggest one in all of California at the time. Maybe still, I don't know. And so the answer is, it's not a conversion. It's not gerus. You have to accept all the mitzvah. Ruth did. Now, what happened over time is that it became formalized and institutionalized as the Jewish people grew, and as a lot of bad rabbis came out. A lot of rabbis that are not serious, a lot of rabbis here in this generation, it's open Orthodoxy. In another generation, it might have been Karaites. In another generation, it might have been other kinds of highly liberal people who fudge the rules. And so it had to become formalized. And that's what we have now. Today, if someone wants to convert to Judaism, they typically go through a study of about 2 years. And after about 2 years, that is what normally goes on now, is you have your local rabbi as your madrich and your guide and your sponsor. And then you have a bet din who meet with the rabbi of your local shul. He's meeting with you all the time. He sees you in shul every Shabbos. He sees you at his home every so often. He knows from other people. You're immersing yourself in the community. And then once every 3 months, 4 months, you go to sit in front of the 3 rabbi bet din who are your bet din, and they catch up with you and they talk with you. They don't put you through questions. They don't have a test or a quiz. They talk with you. And they just gauge how you're doing. They are in touch with the local rabbi, the sponsor. And the rabbi, he's the one who's really updating them on what's going on with this lady. We'll use the name Kathy Kathy's doing great. Or I'm not sure yet about Kathy. There's still an open question mark. And then you reach a point where you tell the rabbis, Kathy's ready, or Kathy's not ready. And I don't know if Kathy's ever going to be ready. And then the rabbis decide also. It's their call, not the sponsoring rabbi, though they may invite the sponsoring rabbi to be one of the 3 on the bet din. But ultimately, a bet din of 3 finally make a decision, you're ready. Now, how do they do this? Meaning 20 minutes once every 3 months. Because as you start to talk to somebody over 2 years, they sound different. They talk differently. They use different language. They don't accidentally use a curse word. Where the first time that something comes out of their mouth, like, oops, I'm sorry, rabbis, I didn't mean that. Oh, it's okay. But you don't expect to hear that word 2 years later. That oops, after 2 years, you expect a different kind of, the way they'll talk about intimacy. If the rabbis are talking to them about mikvah, they'll be speaking differently. You'll ask, how was Shabbos? They'll be talking about Shabbos. And they'll be talking about, oh, it was very nice, but the shul, they had a bar mitzvah, and the family brought in 600 people for the bar mitzvah, and it was so noisy, you couldn't hear the davening. And like the rabbis will know, we'd never expect to hear that from her 2 years ago. It was too noisy to hear the davening. So you just pick up on it. One last thing about this before we go back to the text. Reform conversions are such a joke to begin with that I'm not going to even go into it. That's a joke. If you hold that Marilyn Monroe is Jewish, so you and I don't have the same opinion. Nobody in our classes thinks Marilyn Monroe is Jewish. She was a supporter of Israel. So is Mike Huckabee. In fact, he's also more Jewish than Marilyn Monroe. And he's a Christian. He doesn't say he's Jewish. Same with Elizabeth Taylor, et cetera, et cetera. Conservative conversions are interesting because they do teach stuff. Reformed conversions, they teach so little, and much of what they teach is wrong, and the opposite. Conservative, it depends on which conservative rabbi you're studying with. Most conservative conversions include teachings that violate core Jewish concepts. You can be sure what they have to say about, in this era, about LGBTQIA+. It's already not Judaism. And what they say about transgender. I had a young lady met with me for a conversion and had already converted conservative. It's very common. Very common for an Orthodox rabbi to have someone come, Rabbi, I'd like to convert to Judaism. And as you start to sit down and start describing, the person says, well, let me just stop you for a moment, Rabbi, if I may. I already have a conservative conversion. Sometimes I already have a Reformed conversion too. I got a Reformed conversion because I didn't know better. Because I'm a guy from Idaho. You ever live in Idaho, Rabbi? There's not a lot of shuls in Idaho. Not a lot of yeshivas in Idaho. At last look, none. So it probably one Chabad. So I didn't know from nothing. I saw a building with a big Jewish star, and I got converted. And he called himself rabbi, or she called herself rabbi. Both of them, she and her partner. The two of them were rabbis. So I had a Reform conversion. Then as I moved from Idaho to, Idaho, to California, I learned that the Reform conversion's bupkis, and I got a conservative conversion. I went to UJ, University of Judaism, or whatever they call it now. They've had a few name changes. And I had a conservative conversion. I can tell you right now, a lady came to me last year. She wants a conversion. I don't do conversions anymore. I don't do, ever since the lung transplant, I no longer sponsor conversions, but I refer people, and I put out the word that I am a referral source in order to help honest people avoid Reform and conservative mistakes. But I had to talk with her. She's had a conservative conversion. She said the first class was on pronouns. Imagine she wants to become Jewish, and the first class is on pronouns. What is God? Is he? Is he she? Is he they? I mean, Ribbon Shalom. Ribbon Shalom. And so they started with pronouns. Here's what I used to find 20 years ago when conservative was more traditional. You would meet someone who had a conservative conversion, and you would ask them, now they're coming from Orthodox, and you would ask them, I understand, if it's okay, I'd like to just get a little bit of a handle on the conversion that you had. May I ask you 2 or 3 questions? I'm not putting you like through the 3rd degree. I just would like, it'll help me get a better gauge of where you're at. Sure, Rabbi, go ahead. What's the bracha for an apple? And a person with a Reformed conversion, it's the old joke, I know what an apple is, what's a bracha? But conservative will be something like, oh, we learned that, Rabbi. We did, for an apple? Mm-hmm. Well, it's going to be Baruch, right? Mm-hmm. Atah, Ador, Elok, Melech, Ha'olam, Baruch Olam. Am I right so far? You're right. Doing great. See, apple. So that's fruit, vegetable. That's the fruit one. So that's bore. Bore mean, no, not mine. Bore, bore pre. Very good. Very good. Just one more word to go. So let's see. It's going to be either Adama or eights. Adama or eights. Eights? You're right. That's a conservative conversion. That tells an Orthodox rabbi everything. Imagine converting to Judaism and reciting a bracha on an apple like that. The problem in Orthodox, after an Orthodox conversion, just the opposite. Slow down. What's the bracha on an apple? Bracha. Slow down. You have to hear every single word. It's not just you're not racing to a fire. Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei peri ha'etz. Now, but that's the difference. A conservative conversion, they learn stuff, but they're not expected to practice it. Why would they be? No one else in the temple is. Often the rabbi isn't. Certainly not the rabbi's kids. And the rabbi only because she had studied it when she was in seminary. But in an Orthodox conversion, you learn everything and you need immediately to start practicing. And that's it. Now, once you converted, you're in. You can't get out. Later, you want to renege and get out. You can't. I mean, it's a free country. We're not going to put you in a Warsaw, Poland ghetto or Kovno. You do whatever you want, but you'll be judged at the end of a lifetime as a Jew. You won't be able to say to God, yeah, I did not keep Shabbat. I did not keep kosher. I did not do that after my conversion because I reneged. I had a novation and I gave up my conversion. God will say, no, you would not be held responsible for any of these things if you had not converted. But once you converted, you have to be judged as a Jew for good and for bad. You have great opportunities in the world to come, and you chose instead this other path. It's your choice. So that's what happens when you convert. But Rabbi, I heard something about that the chief rabbinate of Israel a few years ago, that they took a lady and they said she never converted. And she did convert. And then I had this, that I had a woman came to me who converted under my sponsorship, was horrified. She read in the Jerusalem Post, correctly so, that a rabbinical court had nullified a Orthodox conversion in Israel. So I explained to her, here's what happened. That story was that the woman had converted under false pretenses. When she was asked her questions in the mikveh, do you believe in God? Do you believe in... She said that she never believed any of it, but she said she did because she needed to convert in order to marry the guy she wanted to marry, who otherwise was going to be written out of his parents' will, and the parents were rich. But she never believed it. She never kept Shabbos from the first week she was married. The rabbinate said, oh, if when you were in the mikveh and you said yes, 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 but your mind was no, 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 so you did not convert. And the fact that you've been walking around 5 years, officially understood to have been an Orthodox convert, but you didn't we're not saying you converted and we're now annulling it. We're saying you never converted to begin with, and thank you now for giving us more information. And of course, the rabbis don't just do it. It's like any kind of court situation. The rabbis are not just going to unconvert somebody or are not going to say you never converted simply because a lady comes and says, I never converted. They're going to start inquiring. You have to have an investigation. You need evidence. Did she convert? Didn't she convert? You need evidence. You have to find out, is it true that she never kept Shabbos? So you ask around in the shul. You ask the rabbi that was the sponsoring rabbi, is it true that Kathy never kept Shabbos? He says, well, I never saw her in shul again. I can't say. I just assumed maybe she went to another shul. I don't know. but I never saw her again. And they interview and did her children go to yeshiva? No. And so because it's a big thing to declare a convert not a convert. You see why? Because there's a get. There's a divorce. So suddenly now you're running into a divorce. And they break up. And he doesn't want to give her a get. See how everything gets complicated. That's life. It's not only Jews, it's everybody. I was a lawyer for 10 years. It's non-Jews also. Everybody runs into complications in life. Look at today, if you've been following the news, Trump and Musk. That's the world. That's the world. One day they're bros, they're bro in chief, and the next day, should he be impeached? Yes. And he's an idiot. And that's how people are. All these wonderful all these relationships fall apart overnight. Now the woman wants a divorce. So she gets her state divorce, or Governor Newsom or Governor Hochul divorce under state law, and now she needs a get. And the rich man says, I'm not going to give her a get. I hate her, and I'm going to hold her over a barrel now, and I'm going to. So now she goes to the Beit Din and says, I should not need a get because I never converted to Judaism. What do you mean? And then it comes back. I never believed what I said in the mikvah, and I never kept Shabbos, etc. Or the other way around. She won't receive the get. It's not only the men that do this. The political correctness on the Orthodox left always makes it sound like the problems are when a man won't give the get to the woman. As a rabbi of 40 plus years, half the time or more, it's that the woman refuses to receive the get unless she's paid more money. And it's not only my experience, but dozens of my colleagues have shared with me. I'm normally the one that says the politically incorrect thing. And then they say, we don't want to say it, but we have the same experience. More often, it's the woman that won't receive the get, and the man comes and says, you got to help me because she's got to receive it. So the man goes to the Beit Din and says, but she never really was Jewish to begin with. And she never went to shul. And she never kept Shabbos. So if she never became Jewish to begin with, then she doesn't need a get. And this becomes a big thing in Israel, because in Israel, you have to give, in American, freedom of religion or non-religion. In Israel, you have to give a get in order to marry again. It's a whole big thing. So we have utilized our class in Ruth tonight, and we'll do some text as well. I apologize that we haven't done all the text. We'll go into next week, but that's how I teach. If you're still with me after all this time, I teach Torah. I don't teach Bible stories. Along the way, we have Bible study. And what often happens, it's very interesting. I'll share with you and with the other 100 people that'll be watching on YouTube. We have had people, beautiful, and still do occasionally, Christian people who've signed up. I don't mean Christian people who are half on the road to Judaism. And it's just a matter of working out certain details. That may take years. I'm talking about people who are 100% Jesus Christians, but signed up for the class because they heard about it, or they would read my articles in the American Spectator on political things. And there's a little blurb at the end of my articles that'll say, if you're interested in the rabbi's classes and they like my politics, so they'll come to the class. And they treat it like Bible study, which is. But many of them over time, in the nicest way, they'll tell me, Rabbi Fischer, we love you. And we still keep us on the other list of all your articles and your political opinions. You're the one. But I was looking, please don't take the wrong way, I was looking for Bible study. Like when I was a kid, my father, every Sunday night, we would come home from church and we would sit around and Dad would read a chapter of the Bible. And Mom and all of us would say, that's what I was looking for, a chapter a week. I wasn't looking for all these rabbis, Malbim and Ralbag and Rashi and all these different Jewish laws. I was just looking for Bible study. This class is Bible study, and it's Torah, it's Judaism. That's what makes it meaningful for all of us. So that when you come away from the class, not only do you know who King David is, and can you tell the difference between what they're showing on HBO, which is okay, that David and Goliath story on HBO it's okay, and it's the most religious thing anybody's put out on TV in a long, long time since Mel Gibson and the Passion of the Christ. It's the most religious thing that's been out there, but there are a lot of mistakes, a lot of depictions of David's life that are inaccurate because they're taken straight out of the main text and a little bit of poetic license. We're learning the full story. And to know the full story, you have to learn it with Malbim and Ralbag and Rashi. Let's do a little bit of let's go a little bit into the text. Again, this is the one major detour I plan to do for the rest of the way in the Book of Ruth. The laws of conversion. And in fact, I would even pause a moment now if anyone has any questions about the subject of conversion. Normally, other than Janet asking a question at the end of class, we don't normally stop for questions in order to get more material in. But if anyone has a question, raise your hand and feel free to do it, because this was the opportunity. And if not, it's not the end of the world. You can always email me. We can bring it up another time. But very important to understand that that's how we do it. And the bottom line is, if a person cannot recite a bracha on an apple 2 years after their conversion, that conversion was no conversion unless that person, God forbid, had Alzheimer's in between. But if that person is mentally sober and solid, and 2 years after the conversion cannot tell you a bracha on an apple, that was no conversion. Because in an Orthodox conversion, for 2 years they kept Shabbos, and they sang Shalom Aleichem Eshet Chayil, and they recited Kiddush, and they lit Hadlakat Nerot, and they were Mekayim Mitzvot, and they know what davening is, and they know what Musaf is, even if they don't know it by heart. And even if they don't know all the details of Korban Musaf, the sacrifice, they know Judaism. They've lived Judaism. They have gone to mikveh. And if it's a man and he's never gone to mikveh, he knows that once a month his wife goes to mikveh. He doesn't suddenly say mikveh. What is that? That's the pool of water. He knows what a mikveh is. He knows, believe me, a man knows. He finds out what he signed up for. Here he was living as a Christian, having a good time, and then he suddenly finds out about Taharat Mishpacha, and he finds out, oh, wow. So you learn about that, and so on and so forth with the mitzvot. Let's just do a little bit of, so we could say, we did a little text, and thank you. We did lose a few minutes in the beginning, and thank you so much for being so willing and to really learn with me this important information. So Naomi has a cousin who is Boaz from the line of Elimelech. Boaz is the son of Salmon. She is the daughter of Ploni Almoni. Elimelech is the other brother. Okay, from Nachshon. V'tomer Ruth HaMoaviyah El Naomi. And Ruth the Moabitess says to Naomi, Elchana hasadeh va'alakata b'shu. This will be the last pasuk tonight. I'm going into the field, and I shall gather the gleanings among the grain. We talked about it last week. Achar asher emtzachen be'enav. I'll go to a farm, to a field where there's an owner in whose eyes I find favor. Vatomer la lechi biti. And Naomi says to her, go, my daughter. This is the only pasuk we'll do now, just so we could learn pasuk. I want to know why. I'll tell you why. I want to know why the text continues to call her Ruth HaMoaviyah, the Moabitess. Why is it that now that she converted to Judaism, what did she say? Remember what she said? Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. So she's Jewish. And we know, al pi halacha, is very important halacha. You're not supposed to remind a convert that they're a convert. Somebody goes off the path. Convert does not originally go off the path. They start off the path. They start off on a different path. But let's say a person goes off the path. It's really not cool. Just a regular Jew to a Jew, your own kids or your neighbors, or it's not cool to take someone who spent years trying to get back on track and remind them, I remember who you were. It's a big, big thing for a person who's gone the right path to be accepted without comment and to go through the fiction that no one else even thinks about it anymore. A person who was a criminal, let's say a Jew, criminal in prison, got out of prison, did their time, no pardon, did their crime, did their time, and went straight, and has spent the rest of their lives trying to live down the shame of what crime they did. It's just common sense. You don't remind that person who they were. Comes 20 years later, a Shabbos lunch, and you have 5, 6, 8 people at the table, and they're one, and that person's one of them. And you're talking about something, I don't know, Bernie Madoff is suddenly in the news, let's say, or some other crook is in the news, big crook, small crook. And then there's a small throwaway joke, which is really not funny at all, God forbid. You say, well, Harry, you would know all about that. Yeah, everybody, I don't know if you know this, but Harry could teach Bernie Madoff lessons from the old days. I can't, there's not a worse sin than that. It might even be worse than eating pork with dairy on Yom Kippur. To remind someone who they were when they've gone straight, let them be and let them not be reminded ever. This is a very big thing for conversions. When someone is converted, have to be very, very, very careful not to remind that person later, I know you're a convert. Now look, everything is contextual, and you see what the conversation is going. If the person suddenly says, oh gosh, here we are, we're in a suburb, or we're in the middle of nowhere, there's nothing kosher, and he or she says, I wish I could stop for a Big Mac the way I did in the old days. Okay, just put it on the table. Open the door for the discussion. So you could have a little bit of a discussion about it, but you may not ever raise that discussion. You may not ever raise, maybe privately, in a rare case where someone has come to you with a conversion question and you're the rabbis and most of you aren't, or you're the best friend, and it is clear that that person knows that you know, and you say, look, I would never even raise the subject, but this person came to me and I don't have that experience. And would you be offended if I were to ask you, like, to whom did you go, or were you accepted from the Orthodox by the Orthodox? But by and large, you're not allowed to remind a convert ever, 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 ever that they were a convert. Just like you shouldn't make fun of people's names. It's small potatoes. Even much worse, you must never remind a convert. And by the way, someone who did not keep Shabbos properly, a Mechalel at Shabbat, you don't remind them later. Oh yeah, it's a lot harder now walking to shul, huh? Remember when you in front of other people, and other people don't even know your history or don't know your parents' history? Gotta be very careful. Not allowed to talk about that. So why does it say it in the text? For the following reason only. The mitzvah of gathering the sheaves Leket is a Torah commandment. It devolves only on Jews. Ruth, for her to go gathering the Leket, she had taken on herself Judaism. And this is one of the hardest mitzvahs for her at that moment in her life. You will say to me, Rabbi, you know what a hard mitzvah is? Mikvah, that's a hard, living the laws of Taharat HaMishpacha, or being 100% strictly kosher for the rest of my life. And I work in a place downtown, there's nothing kosher, and all my coworkers go out for lunch, and I can't eat with them. That's hard. Well, for her, she's living in Beit Lechem. Kosher is not her problem now that she's come into Beit Lechem. And keeping Shabbat in Beit Lechem at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, or the Mishkan actually, that's not a problem. A problem is being a woman, having to stand among a lot of gazing farmhands in the hot blazing sun of June and July and August in Israel, gathering sheaves in the open field. That's a horribly tough thing. And not dropping them. And you don't have a car, so you bring 5 sheaves and you put it in the trunk, and you get 5 more and you put it in the trunk, and you get 5 more. And you have to figure, and there's not going to be a bus that you could get them on the bus, someone help you, and then you take the bus home. It's a schlep beyond a schlep. She's a single woman. She's not Jewish. She's gathering sheaves. Oh, people will be ogling her, but for the fact that Boaz gave orders. And it's this time of year, we learned last class, it's Zman of the gathering of the Sa'or, the harvest of the barley. That's literally this time. The time of the Kitzur Sa'orim, the Shavuot season. June, July, you know what Israel is in June, July. And that's extraordinary. So the text is telling us, look how extraordinary she is. That she's a Moabitess. She knew she was signing on for Shabbos and Kashrus. She never signed on for Leket. Had no idea in Moab, when she had a big strapping husband and his brother-in-law, Machlon and Kilion, that one day she'd be gathering sheaves to stay alive. That's this Moabitess, look what she took on. We'll gather to next week, next Thursday, and we'll really be a lot more text focused. Thanks so much for being here, and have a wonderful week. Shabbat Shalom. And I hope you had a great, great Shavua. Bye-bye.